A Heart Unraveled. Mara had always known that life wasn't easy. It required persistence, patience, and faith. But when it came to love, she believed that everything should flow naturally. It was meant to be free, unencumbered, and truthful. She had never been in a serious relationship before meeting Daniel, and when they first crossed paths, it felt like fate. He was charming, affectionate, and so utterly different from anyone she had ever known. Their love story had begun innocently enough. A chance meeting at a coffee shop, a shared conversation about books and films, a connection that bloomed effortlessly into a romance. Daniel made her feel special in ways she had never imagined. He would bring her flowers, take her on long walks under the moonlight, and whisper sweet promises of a future together. His touch was tender, his words sincere. At least, that's what Mara believed. It was only when Daniel introduced her to his parents that the first hint of doubt flickered in Mara's heart. His parents, Susan and George, were warm and welcoming, too warm and welcoming. They acted as if Mara was the daughter they had never had, lavishing her with attention and affection, always asking her about her plans for the future. At first, it felt like they genuinely liked her, but over time, Mara began to notice the subtle hints of manipulation in their actions. "Daniel talks about you all the time," Susan had said once, a smile that seemed a bit too forced stretching across her face. "We've never seen him this happy. You're such a good influence on him." Mara had smiled back, not wanting to overthink it. But the sentiment seemed strange, almost rehearsed. It wasn't just the words, but the tone, as if they were trying to pull her in, make her believe they were invested in her relationship with Daniel. One evening, Daniel had invited her over for a family dinner. It was a rare occasion, and Mara had been looking forward to it, thinking it would be a chance
to strengthen her bond with him and his family. As they sat around the dinner table, Daniel's parents asked her about her ambitions, her dreams, and her thoughts on marriage. It was a lot to digest in one sitting, and the questions felt almost invasive. Daniel, sitting across from her, smiled lazily and added nothing to the conversation, his eyes only occasionally meeting hers. "Do you think you and Daniel would ever settle down soon?" George had asked with a twinkle in his eye. Mara had paused, unsure of how to answer. She wasn't even sure how she felt about marriage yet, it seemed like a distant concept, something she hadn't fully contemplated. "I think, eventually, maybe," she replied, trying to keep it casual. Susan, who had been silent for a while, leaned forward. "I think you two make such a lovely couple. It's rare to find that kind of connection. We hope you'll be in our family for a long time." Her words hung in the air, and Mara could feel the weight of them, the pressure to conform to their expectations. Daniel said nothing, merely nodding in agreement. She tried to ignore the unsettling feeling creeping up her spine, convincing herself it was just nerves. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something wasn't quite right. Days passed, and Mara found herself spending more time with Daniel's family. They often invited her over for dinners, and she began to grow closer to them. But as her affection for Daniel deepened, so did her unease. The more time she spent with him, the more distant he seemed. He was still loving, still affectionate, but something was off. His attention was sporadic, his communication scattered, and his mood fluctuated with alarming unpredictability. Mara loved him, so she ignored the signs. She convinced herself that it was nothing, that perhaps he was just busy or stressed. But then, one evening, everything changed. Mara had arrived at Daniel's apartment to find it eerily quiet. There was no warm greeting, no soft kiss
on the cheek. Instead, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his eyes glued to his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Hey," she greeted softly, walking over to him. He didn't look up. "Hey, Mara, I've been busy. I've got a lot on my mind." She felt the sting of his words, a distance forming between them. "What's going on, Daniel? You've been so distant lately." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm just trying to figure some things out." "Figure what out?" she asked, her voice trembling. Before he could respond, the doorbell rang. It startled them both. Daniel stood abruptly, excusing himself, and opened the door to reveal a woman Mara didn't recognize. She was tall, poised, with an elegance that immediately struck Mara as out of place. The woman gave Mara a polite nod, but her eyes flickered with something Mara couldn't quite place. "Who's this?" Mara asked, confusion clouding her voice.
Daniel glanced at the woman, then at Mara. This is Emily. She's someone I've been seeing for a while. Mara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. What are you talking about? You've been seeing her while we've been together. Daniel's expression hardened. Mara, I didn't want to hurt you. But I'm in love with Emily. I've been planning to marry her for months now. The words felt like a slap. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had given way. She couldn't breathe. All this time, you've been playing me. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes dropping to the floor. I'm sorry, Mara. I didn't know how to tell you. I never meant to string you along, but I couldn't help how I felt. Mara stood there, numb, unable to process the depth of the betrayal. And then it hit her. The signs she had ignored, the manipulation from his parents, the way they'd always made her feel like she was destined to be part of their family. It wasn't love that had drawn them to her, it was their own agenda, a carefully crafted illusion to groom her into the perfect part.
For their son. They had wanted her to fall in line, to believe that she was the one, and all the while, they had known the truth. Daniel's parents, who had appeared so loving and sincere, had played their part in this cruel charade. They had never cared for her, they had only cared for the idea of her, the image of her as Daniel's perfect girlfriend. They had never seen Mara as a person, only as a tool to make their son's life appear ideal. Tears stung Mara's eyes as she turned away. She didn't say anything more. There was nothing left to say. She walked out of the apartment, her heart shattered, the pieces falling away with every step she took. And as she stood on the sidewalk, watching the door close behind her, she understood, she had been nothing more than a pawn in their game. It wasn't just Daniel who had played her. It was his family too. The pain was unbearable, but as the weight of the betrayal settled in, something else started to form inside her, a resolve, a quiet strength. She would move on. She would rebuild her life. Because no matter how deeply she had loved, she would never let herself be a pawn again.